Hello everyone, and welcome back. Before we begin today's topic, let me start with a little riddle for you to think about. We all know that the global pandemic began in 2020. It's been nearly 4 years since then. Now, here's the question. During these years, do you think the wealth of America's richest people has increased or decreased? Most people would never guess the truth. According to data from Forbes, the total wealth of American billionaires has actually risen by 62% since March 2020. Take Elon Musk as an example. His net worth alone has increased by $269 billion, which is a growth of nearly 10 times. But in stark contrast, the real wage growth of American workers during the same period was only about 10%. This contrast reveals a harsh reality in our society today. The rich keep getting richer, while the poor keep getting poorer. And that brings us to today's topic, the Matthew effect. Now, this idea is not new. In fact, it has existed for over 2,000 years. Laozi, the ancient Chinese sage, once wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "The way of heaven is to take from what is in excess and give to what is lacking. The way of man, however, is to take from those who lack and give to those who already have excess." Translated simply, the natural law of heaven tends to balance things out, but the law of man often does the opposite, adding to the rich while taking away from the poor. Look around us today and you can clearly see this truth. In our modern era, wealthy people, even without working every single day, still own multiple luxury cars in their garages, always surrounded by beauty, able to enjoy life as they please. And yet, their wealth only continues to multiply. Meanwhile, most poor people, no matter how hard they work, still cannot escape poverty. They labor tirelessly every day just to survive, but they have no chance to accumulate wealth. In fact, the harder they work, the poorer they seem to become. The gap between rich and poor grows wider and wider. This phenomenon, my friends, is what we call the Matthew effect, a description of inequality, of how wealth and advantage keep concentrating into the hands of those who already have it. So where does this idea come from? The term Matthew effect actually originates from the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament of the Bible. There is a parable that goes like this. A long time ago, before leaving on a journey, a king entrusted 3 of his servants with 1 coin each. He told them, "Take this money and go use it to do business." And so the story continues. When the king finally returned, he called his servants to come before him. The first servant said, "Master, you gave me 1 coin. I used it, and I have earned 10 more." The king rewarded him, saying, "Well done. Because you have been faithful, I will put you in charge of 10 cities." The second servant came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 1 coin. I have earned 5 more." The king replied, "Excellent. You will be given authority over 5 cities." Then came the third servant. He said, "Master, you gave me 1 coin, but I was afraid of losing it, so I wrapped it in a cloth and hid it. Here I return it to you, untouched." The king grew angry and ordered that the 1 coin be taken away from this servant and given to the first servant, the one who already had the most. The king then declared, "Whoever has, more will be given to them, but whoever does not have, even the little that they have will be taken away." This is the Matthew effect, a principle that shows how the strong will only become stronger, while the weak will fall further behind. When applied to society, the Matthew effect becomes very clear. Those at the top of the food chain dominate, and polarization keeps growing. The rich become richer, while the poor become poorer. The children of the wealthy inherit wealth and opportunity, while the children of the poor often remain trapped in poverty. This gap isn't just about money. It isn't only about education either. It's like a 3-layer prison built from material foundations, ways of thinking, financial awareness, personal ability, choices, and even luck. And breaking free from this prison is almost impossible. Let's look at the first layer, the scarcity mindset. The poorer people are, the more they are influenced by it. So what is the scarcity mindset? It's when the less you have of something, the more you focus on it. For example, someone with limited financial means pays close attention to whether they can buy cheaper food. They might be willing to travel many kilometers, switch buses several times, just to save a small amount of money. But in reality, the value of the time they waste often outweighs the money they save. Economist Nathan once explained, "Human vision narrows under the pressure of scarcity. It's like looking through a narrow tube. You can only see a single leaf, but you miss the whole forest." In other words, the scarcity mindset makes human thinking rigid. Being poor in itself is not the most terrifying thing. The truly frightening part is when poverty locks people into this mindset, narrowing their vision and limiting their possibilities. But what is truly frightening is not poverty itself, it is the fixed mindset created by the psychology of scarcity. As Malinathan once explained, human vision becomes narrow under scarcity. A lack of money weakens people's cognitive ability. This scarcity mindset is like the original sin of the poor person's thinking. It causes them to focus only on immediate benefits, while ignoring long-term growth. Malinathan also introduced the concept of bandwidth, the width and capacity of the human mind. If this bandwidth is constantly consumed by the scarcity mindset, then a person's ability to think clearly, to reason, and to stay in control becomes impaired. In other words, those who live under prolonged scarcity waste much of their mental bandwidth. Their decision-making and perception decline because their focus is trapped in short-term survival. They no longer have the capacity to think about investment, personal growth, or future development. Put simply, the poorer a person is, the slower their thinking tends to become. In the mind of someone struggling with poverty, daily survival takes priority over everything else. To put food on the table, they must earn money quickly, usually by trading their time and labor. After exhausting workdays, their energy is depleted. All they want is rest. There's little time left for learning new skills, and almost no space to think about long-term goals. Their world shrinks to only what is immediately in front of them: food, rent, bills, without dreams or aspirations for something greater. And so, the poor remain poor. The American writer Barbara Ehrenreich once tested this reality through a social experiment for her famous book, Nickel and Dimed. She gave up all her previous resources and connections, took just $1,000, and tried to survive as part of the working class. To make ends meet, she had to juggle multiple low-wage jobs, live in distant suburbs, and spend long hours commuting. Most days, she could only afford cheap, fast food. With such a lifestyle, there was almost no time left for self-improvement. As rent and living costs kept rising, she was forced to work even more jobs. Despite her best efforts, she found it nearly impossible to change her situation. And Ehrenreich's conclusion was clear. If a poor person had enough financial stability to support themselves, just a little extra breathing room, they would gain free time to plan, to reflect, and to invest in their future. But without that cushion, every ounce of energy is consumed by mere survival. This is the cruel cycle of scarcity. The scarcity mindset, as we discussed earlier, locks people into solving only today's problems while ignoring tomorrow's ET. Eventually, this leads them to pay double the price in the future. This is the first prison that traps the poor. And before moving on, let me make a quick announcement. We've recently launched a new channel called Tuat Tai Vun, dedicated entirely to the mindset of wealth building, career development, financial prosperity, and creating abundance in life. You can find the link to the channel below in the comments. We truly hope for your support. Now, let's step into the second prison, the original family. Your family of origin is the very starting point of your life. The material foundation provided by your parents directly shapes the gap between rich and poor from the very beginning. The documentary Out of the Way followed the life journey of 3 children from different social classes over a span of 6 years. Take the example of Yuan Han, a boy from a wealthy family. Even though he once took a break from school to start a business, he still had the chance to study abroad in Germany, thanks entirely to his family's wealth. He lived a comfortable and confident life, walking freely whether on the streets of Germany or in Beijing. His life seemed full of light. Eventually, he returned to China, started his own business, and became a CEO. But for poor children, the story is completely different. For instance, Tuo Ge, who came from a low-income family, had to shoulder family responsibilities from a very young age. He started working early just to earn money. Later, he bought a house, got married, and lived the life of a laborer trapped in the cycle of the working class. And then there was Ma Baiquan, a young girl from a remote mountain village in Gansu province. She had just one dream: to go to school. But when she finally made it to town, she realized she could not keep up with the pace of her classmates. By the age of 16, she was married. The last image of Ma Baiquan in the documentary shows her leaning against a wall, talking with other women in her village, most of them already pregnant in their teenage years. This is the brutal truth. The wages an employer pays often have little to do with the true value of the work itself. Sometimes, wages are determined mainly by the cost of training, talent, and the scarcity of skilled workers, not by the real social value of the job. In society, the difference between rich and poor is not always direct, it is often indirect. The wealthy have powerful support behind them, while the poor often walk alone with only their shadow. For example, a rich family can invest large sums of money to train a child into a professional pianist. Meanwhile, a poor family may only be able to gather just enough for their child to attend a driving course, eventually becoming a taxi driver, earning only 4 to 5 million VND a month. This is how the family of origin becomes an invisible barrier, one that keeps rising higher and higher. For ordinary families, this barrier makes it extremely difficult for their children to step onto the path of social mobility. In contrast, children from wealthy families equipped with strong social resources can easily obtain prestigious jobs, high incomes, and enjoy far wider spaces for personal growth. Thus, the family of origin is the second prison that holds back the poor. And now we arrive at the third barrier, the social class divide. There is a bitter saying, "Don't talk about wood conquering earth, or metal conquering wood if you are poor. Everything in the world can conquer you." People may walk the same road, under the same sky, yet between them exists an invisible wall that divides society into separate classes. These layers exist independently, and they are drifting farther and farther apart. The poorer someone is, the more likely they are to face rejection simply because of their poverty. They cannot access good education. They cannot integrate into the circles of the wealthy. Meanwhile, the rich support and celebrate one another, lifting each other higher. But among the poor, suspicion and rivalry often prevail. If someone earns 6 million VND a month, it's very likely that most of their friends and peers are earning around the same. This circle does not provide useful advice or inspiration to break free. On the contrary, they often pull each other down into the same cycle. As the old proverb says, "It is hard for a phoenix to be born in a chicken coop. It is rare for a swan to rise from a flock of crows." Because of these social barriers, the poor cannot enter the circles of the wealthy. They cannot access their information, their way of thinking, or their vision of opportunity. In the end, this explains why the poor often become poorer over time. They remain separated from the rich not only in wealth, but also in mindset, resources, and capacity. And as years pass, this gap grows wider and wider. Most of the poor are deeply influenced by the scarcity mindset, with little awareness of how to break through these barriers. And without that awareness, they fall into greater and greater disadvantage. When we look at resources like education, time, relationships, capital, and access to information, the difference between rich and poor becomes even clearer. The poor earn money by selling their physical labor. The rich earn money through the systems they have built over time. This gap grows larger and larger, reinforcing what we call the Matthew effect. So here comes the question. With the Matthew effect so powerful, should ordinary people even bother trying? Is there really a way to break free from this effect? The Matthew effect exposes a harsh truth about the unequal distribution of wealth. The poor feel anger at this injustice, while the rich naturally want to protect their interests and maintain it. From an economic perspective, the more developed an economy becomes, the wider the wealth gap tends to grow. In ancient times, human wealth was relatively equal. People hunted together and shared what they gathered. But in modern advanced market economies, the means of production are controlled and often monopolized by a small number of people. Compared to these billionaires, the working class has only limited resources, and the gap continues to expand every single day. And yet, recognizing this truth is the first step toward change. Because here's the reality. The Matthew effect is a law of society. We cannot destroy it, but we can learn to follow it and even use it to our advantage. Some people have proposed the idea of redistributing all wealth equally among everyone in society. At first glance, this seems fair. It would erase the wealth gap instantly. But unfortunately, I have to disappoint you. In practice, this idea does not work. First, it goes against basic economic principles. And second, even if you distributed all wealth equally today, within a short time, most of it would flow back into the hands of a small group of people. Over 2,000 years ago, Laozi already observed this truth. He wrote, "The way of heaven takes from the surplus to give to the lacking, but the way of man takes from the lacking to give to those who already have surplus." In other words, the Matthew effect has existed since ancient times. The wealth gap cannot be completely erased. But this also reveals something else. Once someone becomes rich and secures their first success, their social position becomes much harder to shake. Once they have earned their first pot of gold, it is extremely difficult for them to fall back into poverty. So the real question is, How can the poor use the Matthew effect to rise up? The answer: you only need to win once. Remember this principle. Magnify your strengths and make sure to win at least one time in your life. Just once. This strategy was successfully applied by Masao Shioson. He bought a company that had always ranked third in its industry, with poor performance and little prestige. He told his employees, "Let's boost our spirit. Let's at least rise to number one, if only for a single month." And then something amazing happened. After achieving first place, even just for 1 month, the mindset of the entire team shifted. They now had proof that being number one was possible. From there, their confidence, their ambition, and their momentum carried them forward. One of the most fascinating things about the Matthew effect is that once someone reaches the top, they rarely want to give up that position. Think about it. When a team or a company finally reaches number one, even just for a short time, they begin to taste a new identity, a new sense of self. From that moment, they no longer want to step down. Before a person becomes wealthy and powerful through the Matthew effect, they can hardly imagine what it feels like to live as the rich do. A journalist once asked a billionaire, "When did you feel that making money became easy?" The billionaire replied, "From the moment I earned my very first pot of gold." That first win is crucial. Once you succeed once, the second time becomes much easier. That's why your first victory matters so much. Now, let's look at our society today. Every field is becoming more specialized, every profession more fragmented. It seems like the market is constantly shifting, but in reality, what's happening is a grand filtration of people. Those who adapt, who prove themselves, rise. Those who cannot, get filtered out. With the improvement of productivity and efficiency, products in the future will become cheaper and more accessible. But here's the paradox. While goods will cost less, human talent will become more valuable. That's the trend ahead of us. So what do you do after your first win? The next step is to accumulate strength and create a long-term plan. This means breaking free from a scarcity mindset. The trap of scarcity comes from misusing your resources, time, energy, relationships, leading you into negative spirals. To truly solve the root of poverty, one must learn to redistribute personal resources. This means prioritizing what is most important. Let me give you an example. In time management, always solve the important things first. And what counts as important? Anything connected to your future, to your long-term plan. That's what matters most. But here's the challenge. This requires early planning, clarity, and discipline. In fact, Harvard once conducted a long-term study that followed a group of young people with similar backgrounds and intelligence. Among them, 27% had no life goals, no direction. 60% had vague ideals and unclear objectives. 10% had goals and short-term plans. And only 3% had both ideals and a clear, long-term plan. The results? 25 years later, their lives showed a striking difference. Nearly all of that 3%, those with long-term plans and clear ideals, ended up among the most successful individuals in society. Meanwhile, the others largely remained ordinary. So, what lesson does this teach us? If you want to escape the grip of the Matthew effect, don't fight it, leverage it. Win at least once, then use that momentum to build long-term strategies. Because in this game of life, clarity and vision are not luxuries, they are survival tools. In the end, some of those young people rose to the middle class, becoming lawyers, engineers, and business managers. About 60% drifted through life vaguely, living in the average or lower classes without any remarkable achievements, only hoping that their children might succeed in the future. And then, 27% fell to the very bottom of society, spending their lives complaining about others and about the world. These differences all came down to one simple factor: how each person planned or failed to plan their life. And these situations happen every single day, around us, without question. They will continue to happen. Now, let me ask you, which kind of person would you choose to become? The freezing of social class begins with the freezing of the mind. Poor thinking is always focused on solving immediate problems. Rich thinking is always directed toward long-term goals. Never use your personal preferences to challenge the expertise of others, because that will only bring failure and undermine your confidence. Do not try to develop yourself in every direction at once, because spreading yourself too thin will only leave you mediocre in everything. Whether you are in business or simply working for a salary, strive to become irreplaceable in your field. Build your core strength, your true expertise, and only then can you hope to rise into the small circle of the wealthy. The Matthew effect, at its core, is like a wall separating the rich and the poor, two rooms, side by side, but worlds apart. In one room, A vast and luxurious hall, decorated with elegance. On the banquet table sits white sturgeon caviar from the deep sea, saffron spice, and the rarest delicacy of all, white truffles, often called the diamonds of the table. Few people sit there, but those who do live with ease. They dress well, speak confidently, and enjoy life without worry. In the other room, a cramped space, packed with people who work from sunrise to late at night just to survive. The room is plain, crowded, and filled with those who worry endlessly about food, clothing, and shelter. That is the reality of two very different worlds, the world of the rich and the world of the poor. And here's the truth. The social class we belong to cannot be erased. We cannot destroy it. What we can do is learn to move with it, to make use of it, and if possible, to step into that better room. Remember, we don't need to defeat the rich. We simply need to become a part of them. That's why, inspired by the wisdom of the ancients, a new channel has been created focusing on the art of fortune, wealth building, and the mindset required to rise above scarcity. Here, we'll explore how to grow your career, expand your opportunities, and build lasting prosperity. I truly hope this content will bring you more than just insight, but also practical guidance. If you found value in this, the information for our channel is linked below in the comments. And with that, my dear friends, thank you so much for your support, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future.